Hello, neighbors. I'm Heather Kolich, the University of Georgia Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension Agent in Forsyth County. Thank you for joining me to learn about adding transplants to your food garden. In this session of the Connect with Food Gardening series, we'll cover what transplants are and why we use them, which food crops are more reliable as transplants rather than seeds, when different transplants should be planted, tips for selecting healthy transplants, and finally, steps for adding transplants to your garden. Transplants are plants that are already growing when we transfer them into our garden. They may be plants that we purchase from a nursery or garden center, plants from seeds that we start indoors, or plants that we dig up from one area and move to another area. Transplants can give us several advantages over seeds. Some plants require a long growing season to reach maturity and produce ripe fruit, and we may not have that many days between the beginning and end of the season. If we plant eggplants from seeds, for example, we have to allow 100 to 150 days for those seeds to grow into mature food-producing plants. Eggplant seeds also need a minimum soil temperature of 70 degrees Fahrenheit before they'll germinate. In most years, North Georgia soil reaches 70 degrees Fahrenheit in mid to late May. So if we plant eggplant seeds in the garden on May 17, early cultivars will be ready for harvest in late August, but late cultivars may not have ripe fruit until October, and that's when we're running up against our first frost date. If we add eggplants to the garden as transplants, we can expect to begin harvesting in around 70 days, or in July for the early varieties, and continue harvesting late maturing varieties late into September. Transplants help eliminate the uncertainty of germination. Even under perfect conditions, some seeds can take 3 weeks or longer to germinate. We get better results by starting these types of seeds indoors, where we can control temperature and provide consistent water through the germination and seedling stages, and then we can transplant them outdoors. Because transplants go into the garden as larger plants, they're more hardy than the tender seedlings that are easily damaged by pests and weather. Unlike seeds, transplants allow us to grow plants with specific genetics. These strawberries, for example, are genetic clones of a particular cultivar, so I'm confident the crop will be what I expect. With asparagus, male plants produce a greater quantity of edible spears than female plants do. Female asparagus plants also produce berries, which draws birds, which eat the berries, and then drops them where we may not want asparagus growing. Using transplants allows us to select for male plants. Transplants can also help us catch up if weather conditions or our schedules delay planting until later in the growing season. Transplants can benefit us in our summer gardens as well as our cool season gardens. In the summer, use transplants for eggplants, peppers, and tomatoes, and plant these all together. They're in the same family, so grouping them when you get started makes them crop rotation and pest control easier. Sweet potatoes are planted as slips, or rooted cuttings that are genetically identical to the parent plant. Although basil seeds can pop up in as little as 7 days, other types of herbs like chives, dill, parsley, and rosemary may take 21 or more days to germinate. Mint plants frequently cross-pollinate, so seeds are likely to grow a hybrid plant rather than a pure cultivar. Since we typically use only small amounts of herbs, bringing them into the garden as transplants can give us immediate use. For the annual cool season food garden, either fall or spring, plan to use transplants to grow broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, and onions. Asparagus and strawberries are perennial food plants that will spread over time, so carefully consider where to plant these cool season transplants. When spring fever hits, gardeners are ready to get out and plant on the first warm, sunny day. But we need to remember that soil temperature changes much more slowly than air temperature does. Setting warm season plants into cold soil can slow or stop growth and cause injury that weakens the plants. The purple veins and the undersides of leaves on this tomato are signs of phosphorus deficiency. In cold soil, phosphorus is unavailable to the plant roots. We need to wait until the danger of a spring frost has passed and the soil warms to 70 degrees Fahrenheit before we add warm season transplants to the garden. The temperature calculator on the Georgia Weather Network shows soil temperature data at different depths. For warm season transplants, we want soil temperatures to reach 70 degrees Fahrenheit and stay there for several days before we set plants into the garden. This usually happens in mid to late May in North Georgia, but as you can see from the data collected at the Alpharetta Weather Station, soil in this area is barely above 60 degrees Fahrenheit from May 7 through 12. In previous years, the soil was much warmer for the same time interval. Cool season food crops have the best flavor and performance when they reach maturity during cool months. Some cool season crops can weather temperatures in the low 20-degree range, but others are frost sensitive. In the spring, plant after danger of frost has passed, or plant these plants in a cold frame or hoop house that will provide some frost and freeze protection. To figure the planting date for a fall harvest, count backward from the average first frost date for the number of days required for your plant to reach maturity. That is the last potential planting date. For example, a broccoli plant that needs 100 days to reach maturity should be planted at least 100 days before the typical first frost date for the region. Where the typical first frost date is October 30, this broccoli plant needs to be in the garden by the middle of July. An early maturing broccoli cultivar that only needs 60 days to reach maturity can be planted a month later. To select healthy plants, look beyond what's visible. Closely inspect leaves and stems for signs of pests such as fungal leaf spots, stem cankers, or insects. Lift the leaves up and look underneath for aphids and other insects. Gently lift the plant out of the container and check the root system. Roots should be plentiful and well developed. Healthy roots are plump, flexible, and light in color. Stay away from those plants that already have the little tomatoes, peppers, or whatever growing. That fruiting really doesn't give us a head start. Instead, it takes energy away from the root system. After we transplant the plant into the garden, we want plenty of energy going into establishing the root system so that it's strong and expansive enough to support plenty of growth and production throughout the season. Now let's talk about the exciting part, planting. We selected healthy plants and brought them home. And the first step in planting is to wait a little longer. To avoid plant stress, we need to give our transplants a few days to adjust to their new environment before we put them into the garden. This process is called hardening off. On day 1, place the potted plants in a sheltered spot outside during the morning or in the shade for a couple of hours. Then bring them back indoors or move them out of the sun. Over the next several days, repeat the process and add an hour to the previous day's time spent outside. We can also take advantage of cloudy days and shady spots to help harden off plants. Be sure to monitor the moisture of the soil in the pots and water the plants as needed. Potting media can dry out very quickly. Once plants are hardened off, step 2 in planting is preparing the planting hole. Mark out the appropriate spacing between plants based on what they need for their mature size. Then moisten the soil. Dry soil can pull moisture out of plant roots, so we always want to plant into moist soil. The size of the planting hole will depend on the size of the transplant, but it should be wide so that roots can stretch out, and just deep enough so that when we backfill the hole, the soil from the container is level with or slightly above the level of the garden soil. Worm castings are okay to add to the planting hole if you have them, but don't put fertilizer in the bottom of the hole. The salts from the fertilizer can damage plant roots if they make direct contact. For step 3, we'll carefully remove the transplant from the pot, loosen the potting soil, and gently spread the plant roots so that they can grow outward from the plant stem. Once we do that, we'll test the depth and width of the planting hole again. We may need to expand the sides to accommodate the roots and adjust the level of soil in the bottom so that our backfill doesn't cover up any of the exposed green stem. Finally, we'll backfill the planting hole and gently firm the soil around the transplant. Of course, as we've discussed in other webinars, there's always an exception. Tomatoes can be planted deeper than where their stems emerged from the potting media. Deep planting helps tomatoes develop a more vigorous root system. To prepare tomatoes for deep planting, snip off the leaves from the lower portion of the stem. Here, you can see where the lower leaves have been snipped off the stem of the tomato plant, and the plant was planted in the garden bed up to the level of the remaining upper leaves. The tomato plant looks much shorter in the bed than it did in the pot. Finally, after firming the plant around your transplant, sprinkle some vegetable and fruit plant fertilizer around it and water it in well. Be sure to brush any fertilizer off plant leaves if it lands on them. Fertilizer can damage leaves by contact the same way it can damage plant roots. For container gardening, select bush-type transplants or look for cultivars that are bred for container growing. Select containers that are big enough to support the mature size of the plant and drill drainage holes in the bottom if they aren't already there. Container plants may need daily watering. Plastic pots retain moisture better than clay pots do, and they weigh less, so they're easier to move around and catch more sun. The root system isn't as protected from temperature extremes in containers as it is when it's planted in the soil. So use pots with thick walls and light exterior colors to reflect heat. Plant roots can cook in the dark, thin plastic pots they came in from the nursery. These tips will help your plants stay healthy and productive. Pull weeds immediately so they aren't robbing your plants of soil moisture, nutrients, growing space, and sunlight. Spend time in your garden and scout daily for signs of pests. Identify pests and take appropriate measures to manage pest problems early on before they get out of control. Your county extension agent can help with pest identification and suggest management actions to take. Supplement rainfall to ensure your plants get an inch of water each week, but don't use overhead watering. Roots need water, leaves don't. Wet leaves allow fungus to grow. Use soaker hoses instead. With soaker hoses, the water goes where it's needed, down on the soil where it can get to the roots easily, and it isn't lost to wind and evaporation. Best of luck with your transplants, and be sure to check out the other webinars in the Connect with Food Gardening series. For more information, please visit the UGA Extension Forsyth County website or visit extension.uga.edu. Thank you for watching this webinar, and happy growing!